Okay, in today's tutorial I'm going to look at making this countdown thing. The tutorial is actually less about the final product and more about how we make this counter. What's special about this counter is that you can change what is being counted and you can change the direction that the coloured circle goes in. So at the minute it's a countdown timer, straightforward, which you can do very easily with the text node or text plus node and using the sort of timer settings like he says, frantically looking for a text plus node. Bring this text plus node in and right click, and then you can go time code, which will give you a sort of countdown thing depending on where you are in your timeline. So you can use this in various forms to do timers, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do it a fancy way. So as I say, the other thing with this counter is that you can have various different counting forms. So at the minute it's behaving as a countdown timer. Up in the inspector there's limited settings, but you can change it to count up or to have percentages going up and down. You can also, as I say, change the direction that the coloured bar grows in. The generator itself is also responsive, so you can have it as long as you want. So if you're doing a tutorial and you want a little indicator in the bottom corner of how much of your tutorial you've got left, you can use your percentage for that. So that's what we're going to have a look at. Okay, so starting as usual, come up to the top of the screen, make sure your effects library is turned on, come down to effects and drag a new Fusion composition into your timeline, and we will go into Fusion. So the first thing we're going to do is make our circle thing. So for that we're going to need a background. This background can be any colour you want it to be. I think I picked a gradient. Let's go with a vertical gradient. So if we have a look at our background, we can make colour 1 red, colour 2 green, and we get this nice gradient. Then we bring our ellipse and use it as a mask. Now we want to make our ellipse not solid, and we can bring up the border width a little bit. Now to make it draw on enough, I used the length slider and the position slider in various ways. So we'll have a look at doing that now. So the observant amongst you will notice that this has suddenly appeared in the corner of my screen. This is the final product that I've just stuck there to refer back to aid my aging memory. So that's why it's there, you can ignore it. Okay, so back in our ellipse, the first thing we're going to need to do is add a couple of extra controls that we can use expressions to reference. So we'll do that first. So you can either right click on your node and go to edit controls, or you can come up to the title of the node in the inspector and you've got the same option, edit controls. So I need a drop down menu that will have clockwise and counterclockwise is my first control. So we're going to name that control direction. It will be a number. You'll notice that the ID has changed to match the name, and that's fine. Now we could keep it on the controls tab of our ellipse, but I find it, just for my head, easy to put a new tab called user. So we'll put it in there. The range will be 0 to 1, and it will be an integer because it will be a drop down list. You'll have a choice of 0 or 1 basically. So we'll put those in, and you make a drop down list by picking combo control, and then you need to add your choices. So we'll have counterclockwise and clockwise. So clockwise is 0, counterclockwise is 1, and we click OK. Now if we come up here, you'll notice that there's an extra tab appeared called user, and there is our drop down menu. But we now need to go and add another control for an expression. So right click, edit controls, give it a name. Again, it's going to be a number. Make sure that the ID matches your name. It's going to be in the user tab again. This doesn't need to be an integer, but it will default to 0. It will again have 0 to 1 range, and this time we're going to use the screw control. Click OK, and now we have our two new controls, expression 1 and our direction selector. Okay, so we've got our controls set up, and we'll come back to them in a minute. So now if we come back into the control tab, what we're going to do is we're going to animate our circle so that it comes from 0 to full length for the length of the clip. Now you can do that simply by keyframing it. So there's 0 there and 1 there, and that would work. But that's not responsive, so if we change the length of the clip, we'd need to come back in and change the keyframes. So to get around that, we're going to use an expression. So if we just reset that, and we're going to go to length, we're going to right click, select expression, I'm going to delete what's in there. And now we're going to click in our expression box and type time divided by comp dot render end. Now you need to be careful with doing this. These expressions are case sensitive, and they need to be exactly as I've typed them. So time all lowercase, divided by comp all lowercase, dot render end, but with capital R and capital E. Once you've done that, click outside the box, and now you'll find as you scrub through your timeline or through your clip, our circle will grow, so it goes from a dot to a full circle over the time of the clip. And that's brilliant. That's kind of what we wanted to do. Difficulty with that, and the bit that grated on me a little bit, was it goes anti-clockwise, and I don't like it going anti-clockwise. And this is where our user expressions come in. So to make it go clockwise, we have the same expression in our length, but what we need to do is move this dot in the opposite direction so that it appears that the line is growing in a clockwise direction. if we come into our user settings, go to expression 1, right click and select expression, and then in this box we need to type 1 minus open brackets time divided by render end and close brackets. And if we set this back to clockwise for the minute, and if we come back into our controls tab, now we need to put an expression on position. So again, right click expression. Now this expression is going to be an if expression, which means it's going to look at the direction control, and depending on what state it is in, it will return different values. So we do if with 2 eyes, open brackets, direction, space, 2 equal signs, equals 0, and you do comma, expression 1, comma 0, close brackets. So basically it's saying if direction is 0, then use expression 1. If it isn't equal to 0, then use 0. So at the minute our controller is set to clockwise, which if you remember from earlier is 0. So now you have a clockwise bar. But if we come back and set it to counterclockwise, it's now going the other way. So basically if direction is 0 or clockwise, use expression 1, otherwise use 0. And that's exactly what it's doing. So that's basically our circle thing made with our expressions and our extra controls. We still have the ability to adjust the height and the width of the circle, the border width, etc., as you normally would. What I will do is, if you right click on height, select expression. Now if you click the plus sign, drag it out, you get this little line. Drag the little line to width. Now what we've done is we said the height equals the width, and so that way if we move the width slider we stay the perfect circle and we don't need to worry about it going all funky and elliptical. And as I say, we can tweak the border width to what we want, and we can change this depending on what numbers are inside and how big our numbers are. Okay, so that's our ellipse, how we want it. The next thing we're going to look at is the numbers, the text as it were. It's the only other sort of difficult node, if you like, in this tree. So this is my sort of macro that I made. The background is slightly different because I used a gradient and shrunk it and spun it and did all sorts of funky things to it, but we don't need to worry about that just at the minute. So the other thing I did was put a second ellipse on, which we can do quickly. Basically all that is I brought a background in, I dropped it to sort of, yeah, so transparent, like so, and I added a second ellipse to this, and I basically, if you click on your coloured ellipse, which is ellipse 1, click on the little pin at the top here. What that does is it keeps all this information in the inspector if you click on another node. If you now click on ellipse 2, we can tie, so this is ellipse 2, this is ellipse 1, we can tie various parameters for ellipse 2 to ellipse 1 using the pick whip system. So we can, for example, tie the centers together. So right click on ellipse 2 center, expression, grab the little plus sign and come down to ellipse 1 center. And now the two are tied together, so if you move ellipse 1, ellipse 2 will come with it. And we can do the same for the size. So we can go to width and height. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same as I did earlier. I'm going to tie the height to the width first. So height to the width, and then the width expression, I'm going to use the width from ellipse 1. So now this is both the same size. This is going to be another ring, so we can just uncheck solid. Border width we can tie together. So now we've got a border that's the same width as our original ellipse. Then all we do is we take the background from our colour ellipse 1 and drop it onto the output of the background from ellipse 2. And if we view the merge, you've got your ring just with this sort of pale black sort of ring around it. So that's what that bit was about. So we can just move that off to the side for a minute because we don't need that now. So yeah, the next thing we're going to look at is our text node. So again, looking at the macro that I brought in, if we click on text, you can see this is our main text screen. Generally speaking, we can unpick that because we don't need it to be there anymore. Generally speaking, there's nothing funky on this screen except this expression here. So you can't actually see it very well there. So if I just copy that and paste it in here so we can see it. So basically this expression will return a value of expr with counter type +1. The counter type will be another drop down menu, much as we had with the clockwise counterclockwise, but it will have 4 options in it, and each option will have an expression that raises. So you've got expression 1, 2, 3 and 4. This passes expression 1, 2, 3 or 4 back into this get value. What we've got at the end is it tags on if the counter type is a percentage, so a percentage up or down, it will tag a percentage sign on in the end. So we'll come to this expression in a minute. So if we carry on looking at our example, again, if you compare these icons with a regular text plus node, what you find is this extra user tab, and if we open that up, let me just click out because that ellipse is getting on my nerves. Why won't the ellipse go away? Right, sorry. If we come back into our text node, so inside our user tab, again I've put all the controls. So you have a drop down box with your 4 options of counters, and then you have expressions for each of the different counters. So again, this is the editing the controls thing, which we did for the ellipse. Instead of 2, we've got 4. So we'll work on that now. So let's just close this for a minute. We're going to bring in a text node, and we're going to right click on the node and add controls. And the first control we'll add is the drop down menu. So we're going to name that counter type, again your ID reflects it. It's going to be a number. I'm going to keep it in the user tab. It's going to be an integer, and the range is going to be 0 to 3, which will give us four options. Again, we need to come to the combo control, and we need to type in our 4 options. So we had seconds up, seconds down, percentage up, and percentage down. So now if we come to our text plus node, our user tab has appeared with our drop down, and there we go. So now we need to make the expressions that we can tie in to this drop down menu. So again, back to your node, right click, edit controls, and we're going to call the first one second up expression. Now what's important here is the ID, and these need to be I don't know why it keeps putting these values in at all, but anyway. So expression 1, I think because I've done that it's searching here, so let's rename that to second up expression. We're going to name this one expression 1. I'm going to clear out all these because I don't want them. Right, so seconds up expression will be expression 1. It will be a number, it will be in the user tab, it will have a range of 0 to 1, and it will be a screw control. And there we have it. So now I'll just quickly whiz through. It's exactly the same procedure. I'll add the other 3 expressions. You can label these whatever you want, as long as the ID is EXPR1, 2, 3 and 4. What the actual labels are doesn't matter. So we've got everything ready to go here, so what we need to do now is start to populate these with our expressions. So again, right click on each one, click on expression to open up the expression field, and now we need to come back to our crib sheet where I had the expressions earlier. So this is the expression for the counter going up. It basically, floor means that it will take a number with decimals and round it down to the nearest whole number. Time is whatever frame you're on, divided by, and this comp get prefs comp frame format rate, basically what that does apparently is it pulls the frame rate of your current timeline. So in my instance, I believe I'm on a 24 frames a second timeline, so it will pull 24 seconds, or 24 as the value. If you divide time, which is your frame number, by your frame rate, you'll get a number of seconds. What this allows is that you can drop this generator onto any frame rated timeline, so it's built in 24 frames per second, but I can equally drop it on a 60 frames per second timeline and it will still accurately count in seconds. So that's what all that gobbledygook is there anyway. So now the easy bit, copy and paste it into the relevant box. And again, I'll do the same for the other expressions. So this countdown, you've got floor this time rather than just time. We've got comprend end, which is your clip length, minus time. So what that does is it will count down backwards rather than forwards. And then your percentage ones are fairly straightforward. Basically, it works out the percentage by taking the time, which is your frame, dividing it by comprend end, which is your clip length in frames, and then just multiplying the answer by 100. Again, we've stuck floor at the beginning of both to keep them as whole numbers, and in the percentage down you see it's 1 minus the expression, and that just counts down from 100%, and this one counts up to 100%. So again, we'll copy and paste those over. And now you have your 4 expressions, each showing different numbers. And if you watch the numbers here as I play, or as I scrub the timeline, so I'm at the beginning of the timeline, so seconds up is counting from 0, seconds down is counting from 7. It's effectively 8 seconds, but it goes from 7 to 0. Percentage up, again, it's counting from 0, and percentage down is counting from 100%, and as you scrub through the timeline you'll see them change appropriately. So that's our expressions. Now what we've got to do is get those expressions into our text node. So we come back into our main text screen, and if we go to style text, right click an expression, we can delete that, and now we come to our final expression, which was the one we were talking about earlier. So self is the style text box, so it's saying style text box, get a value that is expression and then counter type plus 1. Because we've got 4 expressions, the counter type starts 0 to 3, but our expressions go 1 to 4, so that's why you've got counter type plus 1. Don't know what the time does, but it's important because I took it out and it all stopped working. So there you go, you need your time in there. And then counter type greater than 1, so 0 and 1 are our seconds counters, 2 and 3 are our percentages. So if the counter type is above 1, so i.e. 2 or 3, it tags a percentage onto the end of the text display. So again, I'm going to copy that and chuck it in the box here, and all things being equal, if we now look at our text node in the viewer, it's at 0. The reason it's at 0 is because we're counting our seconds up. So if we now play through, you'll see our text starts to go up. Equally, if we change this to percentage up, you've got 0%, and it will go up. And I'm slightly stunned that we've got this far and it's actually working. Brilliant. And that's basically all the hard work done. All you need to do now is the sort of aesthetics. So we've got our ring and we've got our numbers. So merge the two together and drag the merge to your media out. Put your media out in your viewer. You can see you've got your faint black ring with your little coloured ring about to start growing. And as we play, I suppose what would be nice, and maybe I'll work on it, is if we're counting down to have the ring full at the start and then get smaller, but that's something for another day. In your main controls are your ellipse 1 and your text node. So in your ellipse 1 you can bring your circle size down. In your text node you can do everything that you would normally do in a text node. You can increase the size, you can change the font, the colour, etc, etc. And that's basically it. Now, I guess the next or final part of this will be a little look at building the macro. When we're thinking about building our macro, we want to think about the controls that we want the user to have access to. In this instance, we want controls from the text node and controls from the ellipse node. So what we're going to do is we're going to select those two nodes first. For a node tree this size, it doesn't really matter. It's not like you've got loads of nodes to search through to find your controls. But if you had a much bigger node tree, then it's important to select the nodes that you want to work on first so that they appear at the top of your list. So we'll select text, press and hold the Control key and select ellipse. Now with the Control key still pressed, we simply group select the others in any order and make sure you include all your nodes. If we now right click on any of the nodes, come up to macro and create macro, and we get the macro editor. First thing we need to do is give it a name. And then we start selecting controls for the user to access. So we're in our text 1 node. There's nothing in the image section that we need to worry about. In the text section, ordinarily you would select style text, but in this instance we don't want to because our expressions are filling that field for us, so we don't want the user messing with it. So we will select font, style, colour, size and tracking. We don't need to worry about the layout or the transform or the shading tabs. The next one we need to worry about is our user tab that we created with our expressions, and we want the user to be able to change the counter type, so we check that, and that's our text controls done. Next we open our ellipse, and in the ellipse node we want border width and we want width and height, but now height is already tied to width, so all we need to worry about is width, and you can rename that if you want. Any of these in this central column are labels effectively that you can change to whatever you want. So that's our controls, and finally down at the bottom here we've got user again with our expressions and controls that were created, and we want the user to access the direction function so that they can change from clockwise to counterclockwise. So that's all the controls that the user needs. Close everything down, hit the close button, and you'll be asked, do you want to save? Yes you do. And you get this save dialog box. Now for me, I'm working on a Mac and I want to save this as a generator, so the path is Mac HD, library, application support, Blackmagic design, DaVinci Resolve is already open, Fusion, templates, edit, and finally generators. Now I've already got this macro saved, so I'm not going to save it again, but once you've got to that point you just hit save and your macro generator would be saved. What you would then do is restart DaVinci Resolve, and is if you have a random clip or even a solid colour, for example, which we can turn a nice pale grey, I think. So if we now come into generators and find our multi-counter, drop it on top, and away you go. You can click on your multi-counter and these are the controls that your user has available, so you can change the font style, colour and size for the text, the counter type, the border width, and I changed in our example I changed this to circle size, but yeah, the same principle applies. And you see as you increase the size, both the coloured circle and your black transparent or semi-transparent ring go with it. Once you've decided on which counter you want, etc., you would then come into the video tab up here and you can use the video tab to zoom and position your counter wherever you wanted it. So if you wanted it with a sort of extended counter across a long clip, you could keep it in the corner so it's less obtrusive. If you wanted it as a countdown timer leading into something, you can bring the size up. So yeah, that's how you sort of adjust the size and the position. It is possible to build it into the macro, we just didn't on this occasion. And that, as they say, is that. Hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. Like, subscribe and hit the notification bell, etc. One last thing before I go, as I said, this is responsive, so if you want to drag everything out longer, now it doesn't always reset, so if you come back to the start and just change the counter type and then change it back, it'll reset. So now you've got 18 seconds rather than 8 and it will count. Again, it's Fusion comp, so you need to let it sort of cache to get it to run smoothly, but you get the idea. That's it. Thanks a lot. Cheers. See you on the next one. Bye.